does this tax landscape affect humanity? When here there's a 0% rate and there a very high tax. Why does this happen? What is this kind of seismic tax activity?
It's an illusion. The thing is, in any case,
So it's a kind of compensation then?
In any case, we'll end up paying one way or another, to the country, the state, or the place we're in. I've observed my acquaintances, friends, and clients who like to use discount cards or bonuses. In practice, they gain here, but then lose somewhere else. And that's a pattern. So, for example, if we live in one place, but set up a business somewhere else with lower taxes, while here the law imposes higher taxes, that law still affects us. Even if we save money there, we'll inevitably lose it somewhere else, spend it or invest it inefficiently, and it will leave us, not through the tax system.
So offshore zones currently work exactly like this. A person saves money, may genuinely disagree with the system, doesn't feel that this money will go where it should, and sets up an offshore account as a kind of protest, but still ends up losing.
Yes, when he does it out of fear, saving, or greed, that money won't benefit him. Because as I said before, we need to change the worldview, starting with raising mothers, then their children. And these children are raised by caregivers and teachers filled with love. We can always find enough people who will educate and raise children in this way. By increasing love, we create the effect that a new tax policy can be built, where a person will be motivated to pay taxes. They will align with his worldview and the values instilled in him, and he will understand how the state distributes money and what it is used for. By then, I think there will only be digital money, and he will track his taxes. Based on the rough outlines we've made, initially a person might pay, for example, 70% of taxes as distributed by the state and take part himself in deciding where and for what to pay the remaining 30%.
Let's clarify that out of 100% of the taxes a person pays, say 15 to 20 to 30% depending on where they live, 70% is entrusted to the state, while the remaining 30% can be managed by the individual, allowing them to feel like an investor.
A participant. My vision involves digital money. When a tax is paid, we create a system where these digital tax funds can be tracked to see where they went. And because a person has the right to allocate 30% specifically to the tax areas they consider a priority, healthcare, education, science, roads, creativity, infrastructure development, they have this kind of leverage. And as they continue to pay taxes regularly and their income grows, they'll eventually gain the ability to allocate up to 70% of their tax contributions to the areas they find most interesting.
We also talked about how great it would be if those 30% that he can control went primarily to the area where he lives, in his immediate sphere of interest, for example, so that these taxes go to the salaries of the kindergarten teachers his child attends, or to build stadiums within a reasonable proximity to where he lives. According to his interests, he would invest in the areas that would develop in that location, thereby creating interest-based communities. So theater enthusiasts would build theaters and drama clubs for children, and so on. Collectively, this could lead to a new kind of governance. But for now, this is an idealistic vision.
I know that in Ukraine, they actually tried to do something similar. Regions were given funds to spend on their own needs, but if every individual could further allocate funds to the areas they care about, then naturally the country would see divisions by location. For example, one area might focus on horse breeding, another on theater and symphony orchestras, and another on manufacturing and car production. And I want to say that this would create conditions for people to essentially live according to their interests. At the same time, infrastructure could be maintained through a comprehensive analysis system, how to create harmony and economically correct imbalances. This could also be implemented and structured. I remember when Sweden decided to focus on higher education, specifically music education. Within 10 to 15 years, we saw a huge number of musicians, singers, and symphony orchestras rise to prominence simply because attention and funding were directed there.
Yes, that would be wonderful. Because often a person pays taxes but lives on a dark street without streetlights or asphalt. That's the reality right now. But let's return to tax-free zones. Essentially, the question is whether they are harmful or beneficial. So, within the existing paradigm, it seems it's more beneficial for a person to pay taxes to the territory or state where they live and work, rather than trying to fight the system by bypassing it.
In my opinion, paying taxes is necessary because we need feedback with the system. In other words, if the system is the state, it's important to support it. There are areas that must function no matter what, like streetlights. Someone has to manage the electricity, the production of the lights, the paving of roads, and the maintenance of plants and flower beds, and money will be spent on all of this. So, a certain amount of money must always go toward the state's infrastructure.
The next question is precisely about territories. Currently, the taxes we pay depend on the country we live in or our citizenship. In the future, will there be other principles of tax residency? Is it possible to create a unified tax residency for planet Earth?
In theory, everything is possible, but we need to realize that every person must be an individual. Because when we talk about raising children in love, we need to understand that if we identify their inclinations towards certain sciences from an early age, the education they receive will be completely different. And as a result, we could, figuratively speaking, create a Silicon Valley for IT professionals in one place, and elsewhere create conditions for creative people to work. This is speaking very generally. But because education tries to fit almost everyone into certain frameworks and conditions, it suits some children, but for others, it breaks them. Their creative potential and opportunities will never be effectively utilized by either the state or the planet.
We often discussed raising children and future professions, specifically that in the future, the number one profession will be that of an educator. Is that true?
In our hierarchy, speaking of the distant future, the top priority is conscious birth. Children coming into this world when the mother and father are at the highest level of their realization, happiness, love, health, and effectiveness. Because in this context, Nicole, as an astrologer, you can tell us more about how the inner state of the mother and father affects the birth of the child, who they will become, their character traits, and the potential they will have.
Of course, it literally comes from these two poles, masculine and feminine. Our core evolves from what is given. What was laid down will grow. But there are also other factors, including social ones. That is, much depends on the period in which a person was born and what was happening in society. If this person was born to be social and to change society, a very strong indicator, as a third parent, will also be what occurred externally.
I believe that these factors will eventually shape the conditions of the future. At the moment of a child's birth, we will consider where on the planet they are born, who their parents are, and under what circumstances. And from the very beginning, we will know exactly the direction and potential of this child. It's very important that parents approach a child not as consumers. Often when parents strongly desire children, it reflects a state in which they are trying to extract missing energy from the child. They are unfulfilled themselves and attempt to offload their incompleteness onto the child, who arrives as a compensatory mechanism rather than for genuine realization.
You have the ability to see the essence of a person without any calculated systems. And I sincerely believe that sooner or later we will need to abandon all those calculated systems you call accounts, because a person with the potential for raising children can sense, see, and activate all these abilities in a child through their faith.
You speak very clearly, and I completely agree, because I am talking about a transitional stage. When we reach a state of love, when 3 generations have been born in love, then intuition, clairvoyance, sensing, harmonious integration into the system of planet Earth and social communication will work naturally, just as naturally as walking, speaking, or using our hands.
And when will at least the first generation be born? You said 3 generations when we give birth.
You better not ask that question, because the ways of the Lord are inscrutable. I can only make assumptions based on my vision, my worldview. You know, from our current position, it seems impossible. Then a miracle happens and it occurs. Why? Because we look from one perspective with the achievements we have. With other achievements, we might not even be able to evaluate anything. Even I, thinking I rely on experience of vision and the future, actually rely on the frameworks in which I currently live. If you look at science fiction films made in the 1930s, then the 1980s, and then in 2023, you'll see that the eras strongly influence the creators of these films, and the predictions of ordinary futurists are almost always flawed, because 70 years ago a futurist said humanity will die from overpopulation. I don't know exactly how many people there were then, let's say 4 billion, who, according to this futurist, were supposed to die from hunger. As a result, today we have about 8 billion people, if we trust the statistics. And if we look at mortality statistics, we find that many people die from overeating. So relying on here and now experience is impossible. Even if I say I see this society not earlier than 100 years from now, that's probably my bold prediction. For a simple reason, unfortunately, there are people who cling to power, to the system they are used to living in, and overcoming that inertia and experience would require a quantum leap. But how and when it will happen, I do not know.
So it's unclear when these allowances will open up and everything will begin to change?
In my opinion, it is already happening. The question is how long it will take, because according to our bold predictions, when we discussed this topic, if we were moving, figuratively speaking, at the upper levels of development, many processes that have lasted several years could have ended in 2 weeks. But because people continue to be inert, even though karmically they may have already paid all their debts, they continue to act with old methods.
With laws?
And relying on previous laws, even though they no longer work, and it has been shown to them that they don't work probably until that generation that acts this way reincarnates. We will have to, as they say in science, progress occurs as the old professors die off, because they, like canned goods, prevent the new from entering.
Let's return to the question. In the future, will there be principles of tax residency other than citizenship or living in a specific territory?
Yes, there will be, and they will not be related at all.
What principle?
The principle will be people's abilities, their focus, their skills, and their human qualities. So there will be people who will, let's say, practically not pay taxes because their mere presence on planet Earth will act as a huge tax by multiplying and improving the Earth, the people, society, and the greater system we're all part of. And there will be those who pay enormous taxes, not because they are somehow deficient, but because when they pay, it strengthens and improves the state, the planet, and every person who can receive, for example, services or opportunities for that money. And every person who does not pay these taxes improves the world through their inner state, and the one who pays taxes still derives satisfaction from the process in which they feel their own realization.